Commander Patricia Hayes stood in the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching the stars twinkle against the black void of space. She had always loved this view. From here, high above the colony, she could see the entire station spread out below her like a small city frozen in the darkness. The lights from thousands of homes and buildings reflected off the station's outer hull, creating a warm glow that made the cold void seem less lonely. Patricia had been commanding this colony for 5 years now, and every day she felt proud of what humanity had built so far from Earth. The colony had grown to nearly 3,000 people. There were families living in the residential sectors, scientists working in the labs, engineers maintaining the machinery that kept everything running, and soldiers stationed to protect the settlement. Everything worked smoothly under Patricia's command. The people trusted her, and she had never let them down. She thought about her family waiting for her in their quarters. Her spouse Marcus was probably helping their 2 children with their homework. Marcus had wanted to come up to the observation deck with her tonight, but Patricia had told him she needed some time alone to think about tomorrow's council meeting with Earth's representatives. Patricia turned away from the window and walked toward her office. The station hummed quietly around her, the sound of machines and life support systems creating a constant background noise that she had long stopped noticing. She passed by a few officers who nodded respectfully at her. They were all preparing for the night shift change. Everything was normal. Everything was peaceful. She had no idea that this would be the last quiet night Kepler Station would ever experience. Deep in the research sector, far below where Patricia stood, a team of scientists had made a discovery that would change everything. Dr. Kevin Paulson had led the excavation under the station's foundation for 3 months. The ground beneath Kepler Station had revealed something extraordinary. There was an ancient artifact buried deep underground, something that had been there for thousands of years before humanity ever arrived. The artifact was made of a strange metal that did not match anything in the periodic table. Its surface was covered with symbols and patterns that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the excavation chamber. Kevin carefully photographed the artifact and sent the images to Patricia's office. He recommended that they keep it safe and study it thoroughly before making any announcements. He did not think it would cause problems. After all, they had discovered many interesting things on this planet. This was just another discovery, another piece of the puzzle of this new world they were colonizing. Kevin could not have known what was about to happen. None of them could have known. Patricia received the message about the artifact while she was reviewing reports in her office. She made a note to examine it in the morning and went home to her family. Marcus was already in bed when she arrived, but her children were still awake. They wanted to tell her about their school day. Patricia sat with them for an hour, listening to their stories and helping them settle down for sleep. This moment, this simple family time, would become the most precious memory of her life. At midnight, alarms began to sound throughout the station. Patricia jerked awake in her bed. The alarm was different from any training drill she had participated in. This was a real emergency signal. She grabbed her uniform and rushed to the command center, already knowing something terrible was happening. Marcus called after her, confused and frightened. Patricia told him to gather the children and get to the emergency shelters. She had no time to explain. She had no idea that this would be the last time she would ever see them alive. The command center was in chaos when Patricia arrived. Officers were shouting at each other, trying to understand what was happening. The sensors showed multiple ships approaching the station from deep space. These were not human ships. They did not match any design in the human database. Patricia watched as the ships moved into position around the colony, surrounding it completely. There was nowhere to run. A message came through the communication system. The voice was cold and emotionless. It came from a being called Vex Hall, leader of the Vorthan Empire. He said that humans had committed a terrible offense. They had stolen something that belonged to the Vorthans. They had taken an artifact of great importance, a relic of Vorthan history from thousands of years ago. This theft could not be ignored. This crime could not go unpunished. Patricia tried to respond. She explained that they had not known the artifact belonged to anyone. She offered to return it immediately. She begged for a chance to negotiate. But Vex Hall had already made his decision. The Vorthans did not come to talk. They came for revenge. The first attack began without any warning. Energy weapons struck the station's outer walls with tremendous force. The entire structure shook violently. Patricia held onto her chair to keep from falling. She heard explosions echoing through the station. The residential sector was the first target. Patricia realized with horror that Marcus and her children were in that sector. She tried to contact the emergency shelters, but there was no response. The communication system was already failing. Patricia watched on the screens as the Vorthan weapons tore through the station. Huge sections of the outer hull exploded into space. People were dying everywhere. Thousands of them. The residential area where her family was taking shelter was hit directly by a massive energy blast. The entire sector lit up with orange fire, then went dark. Patricia felt her heart stop. She wanted to scream, but she could not. She could barely breathe. More explosions rocked the station. The Vorthans were not stopping. They were destroying everything systematically, methodically, without mercy. Patricia's officers were trying desperately to respond, but human weapons were useless against the Vorthan technology. They fired back anyway, knowing it would not make any difference. Patricia stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think clearly. The destruction continued for what felt like hours, but was actually only 50 minutes. Finally, Vexhal's voice came through the communication system again. He said that humanity had been shown what happened when you steal from the Vorthan Empire. If any humans dared to return to Vorthan space, they would be destroyed completely. Then the Vorthan ships moved away from the station and disappeared into the darkness of space. Patricia was still standing in the command center when everything went quiet. The station was damaged but still functioning. Backup systems kicked in to keep the oxygen flowing and the life support running. She looked around at her officers. They were all staring at her, waiting for orders. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She had survived. She had lived while thousands died, including her own family. In that moment, Patricia understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The universe had shown its true face, and it was merciless and cold. Patricia sat in the damaged transport ship with the other survivors, watching Earth grow larger on the main screen. The journey home had taken weeks, and during that time she had barely spoken to anyone. The other survivors had tried to comfort her, but there was no comfort to give. She had lost everything that mattered to her. Marcus was gone. Her children were gone. Over 2,000 people from Kepler Station had been killed in a single hour. Patricia had survived, but survival felt like a curse rather than a blessing. She had spent the long journey back to Earth preparing her report. She knew that what she had to tell the world would shock everyone. Humanity had always believed that they were alone in the universe, or at least that if alien life existed, they would be peaceful and rational. The attack on Kepler Station shattered that hope completely. Humans were not the most powerful beings in the cosmos. They were not the smartest or the most advanced. They were just a young species that had wandered into the territory of something far more dangerous. When the transport ship entered Earth's atmosphere and began its descent toward the landing zone, Patricia felt a strange mixture of emotions. She was returning home, but home no longer felt like a safe place. The world she was descending toward was about to change forever. In a few hours, everyone on Earth would know what she knew. They would all understand that humanity was vulnerable. They would all feel the fear that had consumed her since the moment the Vorthan ships appeared. The landing was smooth, and Patricia stepped out onto the tarmac of a military base in Nevada. Hundreds of government officials and military leaders were waiting for her. They wanted answers immediately. Patricia was escorted to a secure building where she was debriefed by a panel of world leaders. She told them everything she had seen, everything she had experienced. She described the Vorthan weapons, their technology, their coldness, their lack of any desire for negotiation or peace. General Frank Morrison listened carefully to every word Patricia spoke. He was the head of Earth's unified military forces, a position that had been created just the year before as nations began to realize that they needed to work together if they wanted to survive in the modern world. Morrison was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had spent his entire life preparing for threats, and now he was hearing about the greatest threat humanity had ever faced. When Patricia finished her report, Morrison stood up and looked directly at her. He asked her a simple question. He wanted to know if she thought humans could fight back against the Vorthans. Patricia did not answer immediately. She thought about Marcus and her children. She thought about all the people who had died on Kepler Station. Then she said something that would change the course of history. She said that humans could fight back if they worked together. She said that the Vorthons had superior technology, but they were few in number. She said that if humanity united and prepared properly, they might have a chance to survive. Morrison's eyes lit up. He had been hoping to hear something like that. He had already begun thinking about how humanity could respond. He had already begun making plans. Morrison told Patricia that he wanted her to be part of this response. He wanted her to help lead humanity's counterattack against the Vorthons. Patricia accepted the offer without hesitation. She wanted revenge, and this was her chance to get it. Over the next few weeks, Patricia worked with Morrison and other military leaders to develop a plan. They called it Genesis Rising. The goal was to reverse engineer the Vorthon technology that had been recovered from the wreckage of Kepler Station. Scientists and engineers from around the world were brought together in secret research facilities. They worked day and night to understand how the Vorthon weapons functioned. They studied the materials, the energy systems, the design principles. Patricia spent much of her time in these research facilities, watching the work progress. She also spent time with grief counselors and psychologists who wanted to help her deal with the trauma of losing her family. Patricia participated in these sessions, but she did not really open up. She kept her pain locked inside herself. She used that pain as fuel for her work. Every time she felt the grief threatening to overwhelm her, she would remind herself that she was doing this for Marcus and her children. She was doing this for everyone who had died. The world's governments began to mobilize their entire industrial capacity for war. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were converted to military production. Scientists who had been working on civilian projects were reassigned to weapons development. Soldiers who had been peacefully stationed around the world began training for a conflict that seemed impossible to win. Yet people believed in what they were doing. They believed that they had no choice. News of the Vorthon attack spread to every corner of Earth. Every person in every country knew about what had happened to Kepler Station. The story of Patricia losing her family became famous. People saw her as a symbol of human determination. They saw her as someone who had suffered at the hands of an alien enemy, yet she was still willing to fight back. Millions of people sent messages of support to Patricia. Religious leaders prayed for her. Artists created paintings and sculptures in her honor. Patricia found this attention difficult to handle. She did not think of herself as a hero. She was just a woman who had lost everything and wanted revenge. But she understood the power of symbols and images. If her story could inspire people to work harder on Genesis Rising, then she would accept being called a hero. She would use her fame to push governments and scientists to move faster, to work harder, to never give up. 3 years passed. During this time, humanity learned an enormous amount about Vorthon technology. Scientists successfully created weapons that could match or exceed Vorthon firepower. Engineers designed advanced military vessels that incorporated both human and Vorthon technologies. Programmers developed artificial intelligence systems that could control these ships and weapons with incredible precision. Soldiers trained endlessly to prepare for the coming conflict. Patricia watched all of this happen, and she felt the fire inside her burn stronger with each passing day. She had been promoted to commander of the fleet that would attack the Vorthons. She had been given authority over thousands of soldiers and the most advanced weapons humanity had ever created. She spent her time studying maps of Vorthon space, planning attack routes, imagining how the coming battles would unfold. One night, 3 years after the attack on Kepler Station, Patricia stood in a room filled with military maps and tactical displays. She was reviewing the final plans for the counteroffensive. In a few weeks, the attack would begin. Humanity would send its fleet to Vorthon space. They would finally strike back. Patricia thought about Marcus and her children. She imagined telling them that she was going to avenge their deaths. She imagined seeing their faces, hearing their voices. But she knew this was just fantasy. They were gone. They would never come back. All she could do was make sure that what happened to them never happened to anyone else again. The fleet departed from Earth's orbit on a cold morning in late autumn. 50 advanced warships, each one representing the pinnacle of human engineering and innovation, moved together into the darkness of space. Patricia stood on the bridge of the flagship, the HSV Liberty, and watched her home planet fade away behind her. She knew that some of the ships in her fleet would not return. She knew that some of the brave soldiers and pilots under her command would die before this war was over. She accepted this burden because she had to. This was the only way to stop the Vorthons from destroying everything humanity had built. The journey to Vorthon space would take many months. The fleet moved through the void at incredible speeds, faster than any human vessel had ever traveled before. Along the way, the crew conducted endless drills and training exercises. Pilots practiced flying their fighter ships in formation. Weapons officers trained on the new weapon systems that had been developed during the 3 years of preparation. Soldiers exercised and studied tactical scenarios. Everyone understood that their survival would depend on how well they performed when they finally encountered the enemy. Patricia spent most of her time in the command center, studying maps of Vorton territory and going over battle plans again and again. She had memorized every detail about the 3 Vorthon strongholds that they planned to attack. She knew the distances between them, the defensive systems surrounding them, the probable locations of enemy ships. She had played through hundreds of different scenarios in her mind, trying to anticipate what the Vorthons would do and how she should respond. At night, Patricia would walk through the corridors of the Liberty alone. She would pass by sleeping quarters where soldiers and crew members rested before their next shift. She would pass by the ship's chapel where people went to pray. She would pass by the medical bay where doctors prepared for the casualties that would soon arrive. During these lonely walks, Patricia thought about her family. She thought about Marcus and how he had always believed in her. She thought about her children and the futures they would never have. One night, about 3 months into the journey, Patricia received an unexpected message. It came from a long-range sensor probe that had been sent ahead to scout Vorthon space. The probe had detected an unusual signal coming from a remote space station in the outer regions of Vorthon territory. The signal appeared to be a distress beacon. Patricia studied the data carefully. It seemed genuine, but it also seemed suspicious. The Vorthons would not send out distress signals. They would not ask for help. Patricia called a meeting with her senior officers. Commander David Foster, her chief tactical officer, believed the signal was a trap. He recommended that they ignore it and proceed with the planned attack. Captain Lisa Morgan, the chief science officer, thought the signal deserved investigation. She said that they should learn more about what was happening at that station. Patricia listened to both perspectives and then made her decision. They would send a small reconnaissance team to investigate the station. If it was a trap, the team would be small enough to escape. If it was something genuine, they needed to know what it was. The reconnaissance team consisted of 10 soldiers led by Major Chris Henderson, one of Patricia's most trusted officers. They took a small, fast shuttle and approached the Vorthon station cautiously. When they arrived, they found something completely unexpected. The station was in partial shutdown, and there were Vorthon survivors inside. One of these survivors was willing to communicate with the humans. His name was Kesh, and he was a commander in the Vorthon military. He told Major Henderson that he had something important to tell the human leader. Patricia listened to the recording of Kesh's words through a secure communication channel. Kesh explained that there was a conflict within Vorthon society. Not all Vorthons agreed with the decision to attack humans. Kesh believed that the attack on Kepler Station had been a mistake, a reaction based on pride and old history, rather than strategic necessity. Kesh and others like him had been attempting to convince the Vorthon High Council to reconsider their stance toward humans. They had failed. The council had ordered the destruction of their faction, and now Kesh was one of the few survivors of that conflict. Kesh offered to provide Patricia with critical information in exchange for his life and the lives of the other survivors. He said he would give her the locations of Vorthon military installations, the details of their defensive systems, the specifications of their weapons, and most importantly, the location of the Vorthon Central Command Hub, where Supreme Leader Vexhall directed all military operations. This information would be worth more to Patricia than any weapons system ever developed. Patricia made a difficult decision. She decided to accept Kesh's offer. She authorized Major Henderson to bring Kesh and the other survivors aboard the Liberty. Some of her officers protested this decision. They said that bringing the Vorthons onto a human warship was too dangerous, that Kesh might be a spy or an assassin. Patricia listened to their concerns but did not change her mind. She felt that sometimes the greatest opportunities came from unexpected places. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy could become a valuable ally. Kesh proved to be invaluable. He spent hours with Patricia and her tactical team, explaining the layout of Vorthon military installations and the thinking of Vorthon commanders. He explained that the Vorthons had grown complacent over thousands of years. They had become so confident in their superior technology that they did not believe any enemy could ever threaten them seriously. This arrogance was their weakness. Humans, on the other hand, had learned to work together out of desperation. They had learned to be innovative and creative in ways that the rigid Vorthon culture never could. Patricia also learned from Kesh why Vexhall had ordered the attack on Kepler Station. It was not a strategic decision at all. Vexhall was an ancient being who remembered the early days of the Vorthon Empire, when humans had not even developed space travel. He had seen the ancient artifact as a symbol of Vorthon glory and power. When he discovered that humans had found it, he took it as a personal insult. He decided to destroy the human colony as a way of reasserting Vorthon dominance. The decision had been made in anger, not logic. As the weeks passed and the fleet continued its journey through space, Patricia found herself developing a strange respect for Kesh. He was an alien, a member of the species that had killed her family and destroyed her home. Yet he was also someone who had chosen to do what he believed was right, even when it meant betraying his own people. Patricia understood that Kesh was not a traitor in the traditional sense. He was a visionary who had seen that his society's path was wrong. Finally, after many months of travel, the fleet approached Vorthon space. Patricia stood on the bridge of the Liberty and looked at the tactical display showing the location of their 3 targets. The time had come to strike back. The time had come for humanity to show the Vorthons that they were not an enemy to be ignored or destroyed easily. Patricia opened a communication channel to all ships in her fleet and gave the order to move into attack position. The final battle was about to begin, and Patricia was ready to do what she had been preparing to do since the day her family died on Kepler Station. The attack began at dawn, though dawn meant nothing in the depths of space. Patricia had chosen the timing symbolically. Back on Earth, it was morning when she gave the order to attack. 3 human battle groups moved simultaneously toward 3 different Vorthon strongholds. The first group, led by Admiral Marcus Wells, targeted a military outpost on the planet Vex. The second group, under the command of Colonel Sarah Harrison, moved toward a weapons manufacturing facility on the moon Taralis. Patricia herself led the third and most important group directly toward the Central Command hub where Supreme Leader Vexhall controlled all Vorthon military operations. The initial stages of the battle went better than Patricia had dared to hope. The Vorthons, overconfident and unprepared for a coordinated human attack, scrambled to respond. Their automated defense systems activated and began firing at the incoming human ships. But the humans had learned how to defeat these systems. Kesh had provided detailed information about their vulnerabilities, and Patricia's engineers had developed countermeasures. The first wave of human fighter ships penetrated the Vorthon defenses with minimal casualties, but as the battle progressed, the Vorthons began to adapt and reorganize. Vexhall, upon realizing that he was facing a real military threat, activated emergency protocols. Fourth-hand warships that had been stationed at other locations began moving toward the battle zone. The second and third waves of Vorthon reinforcements were far more powerful and better coordinated than the initial response. Suddenly, the battle became much more dangerous for humanity. Patricia watched from her command center as the tactical display updated with the new information. Her face remained calm, but inside she felt the pressure mounting. She had planned for this scenario, but planning was different from experiencing it. Real ships with real people inside them were being destroyed. The communication channels were filled with reports of casualties and damage. One of her squadron commanders reported that his entire wing of fighter ships had been wiped out in a single Vorthon counterattack. Patricia acknowledged the report and immediately reassigned ships from other squadrons to fill the gap. Admiral Wells reported that his group was encountering heavy resistance at the Vex outpost. The Vorthons were defending the installation with everything they had. Wells asked for permission to retreat. Patricia denied the request. She told Wells that his mission was critical to the overall strategy. If they could neutralize the Vex outpost, it would cut off communications between the Vorthon military and their outer territories. Wells understood. He acknowledged the order and continued the attack, even though he knew that his group would suffer significant losses. Colonel Harrison's group was having better success at Taralis. The weapons facility was more lightly defended than expected. Harrison's forces had already destroyed over 70% of the installation, when she reported back to Patricia. This was good news, but Patricia could not celebrate yet. The real test was still ahead. Her group was approaching the central command hub, and that was where Vexahol and the most powerful Vorthon defensive systems were located. As Patricia's ships entered the inner defenses of the command hub, the Vorthons unleashed everything they had. Energy weapons of unprecedented power struck at the human vessels. The Liberty was hit multiple times, and Patricia felt the entire ship shake violently. Alarms sounded throughout the vessel as various systems failed. The shield generators were working overtime, struggling to protect the ship from the constant barrage of Vorthon weapons fire. Patricia ordered the helm to take evasive action. She ordered weapons officers to target the Vorthon weapons emplacements. She ordered engineering teams to repair the damaged systems as quickly as possible. She was coordinating dozens of different tasks simultaneously, making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Her mind was sharp and focused. All of the grief and pain that she had carried for 3 years seemed to focus into a single point of purpose. She was here to destroy the Vorthons. She was here to avenge her family. One of Patricia's captains reported that they had successfully breached the outer defenses of the command hub. A strike team was ready to be deployed to the surface of the facility. Patricia authorized the mission. Major Chris Henderson, the same officer who had led the reconnaissance mission to Kesh's station, would lead the strike team. Henderson selected his best soldiers, and they prepared their weapons and equipment. They knew that they were about to face Vorthon soldiers in direct combat. They knew that many of them would probably not survive. They prepared anyway. Henderson's team entered the command hub through a damaged section of the outer wall. They moved quickly through the corridors, encountering Vorthon soldiers and security systems. The fighting was intense and brutal. Humans and Vorthons clashed in corridors and chambers deep inside the facility, but the humans had one advantage. They were fighting for their survival. They were fighting for their families and their homes. The Vorthons, on the other hand, had always believed that they were superior. They did not know how to fight an enemy that refused to surrender or give up. Henderson's team pushed deeper into the command hub. They faced resistance at every turn, but they continued forward. Behind them, more human soldiers entered the facility, providing support and reinforcement. The battle raged throughout the command hub as humans fought their way toward the central chamber, where Vexahol directed the entire Vorthon military. Meanwhile, in the battle above the command hub, Patricia's fleet was holding its own against the Vorthon forces. Patricia had positioned her ships carefully, using the planetary terrain and the structure of the command hub itself as defensive shields. She had created overlapping fields of fire that made it extremely difficult for the Vorthons to attack effectively. Despite being outnumbered, the human fleet was beginning to gain the upper hand. Admiral Wells reported that the Vex outpost had finally fallen. His forces had successfully neutralized the installation, destroying the communications hub and most of the defensive systems. This was a major victory, but it had come at a terrible cost. Wells reported that his group had suffered 50% casualties. Patricia felt the weight of those losses, but she pushed the feeling aside. There would be time for grief later. Right now, she needed to focus on winning the battle. Colonel Harrison reported that Taralis was completely secured. All weapons manufacturing facilities had been destroyed or captured. Harrison's group was preparing to move toward the central command hub to provide additional support to Patricia's forces. Patricia acknowledged the reports and continued to monitor the situation. Finally, after hours of intense fighting, Major Henderson reported that his strike team had reached the central chamber. Vexahol was there, standing in front of his War Command console, watching the battle unfold through multiple screens. The ancient Vorthon leader turned to face Henderson and his soldiers. For a moment, no one moved. Then Henderson raised his weapon and told Vexahol to stand down. Vexahol looked at the human soldiers surrounding him, and for the first time in his long life, the supreme leader of the Vorthon Empire realized that he was about to lose a war. Vexahol did not try to fight. He simply stood there, watching the screens that showed his military forces being defeated across the sector. He watched as Vorthon warships were destroyed one by one. He watched as human forces captured Vorthon installations and military bases. All of the pride and confidence that Vexahol had carried for thousands of years drained out of him as he understood the full extent of his miscalculation. He had underestimated humanity. He had believed that a young species could never threaten an ancient and powerful empire. He had been wrong, and now that mistake would cost his entire civilization everything. Patricia returned to Earth 3 months after the fall of the Vorthan Central Command Hub. The journey home was very different from the journey outward. On the way to Vorthon space, the fleet had been filled with anticipation and determination. On the way back, the ships carried the weight of victory and loss. Over 30,000 human soldiers and crew members had died in the conflict. 30,000 families would receive notifications that their loved ones would not be coming home. Patricia carried the responsibility for all of those deaths, even though she knew that she had made the best decisions possible with the information she had at the time. When the fleet entered Earth's orbit, the entire planet erupted in celebration. People in every country took to the streets to celebrate humanity's victory. News channels broadcast images of the returning ships over and over again. Politicians and military leaders rushed to greet Patricia as she descended to the surface. There were parades and speeches and ceremonies. People treated Patricia like she was a hero who had saved the entire human race. She accepted the praise politely, but inside she felt nothing like a hero. She felt like a soldier who had done her job, and now she had to live with the consequences. Patricia moved through the celebrations in a daze. She attended the state dinners and the military ceremonies. She gave speeches about the bravery of the soldiers who had fought under her command. She smiled for photographs and spoke to journalists who wanted to know what it felt like to defeat an alien empire. But whenever she had a moment alone, Patricia's thoughts turned to her family. She thought about Marcus and their 2 children. She wondered what they would have thought of her victory. Would they have been proud? Would they have understood why she had done what she did? These were questions she could never answer. A few weeks after her return to Earth, Patricia made a decision. She resigned from the military. She told General Morrison that she needed to step away from service. Morrison tried to convince her to stay, to help establish new defense protocols and prepare for the possibility of other alien threats. But Patricia was firm in her decision. She had done what she set out to do. She had avenged her family and protected Earth. Now it was time for someone else to take over. Someone who had not lost everything in the conflict would be better suited to lead the next phase of humanity's expansion into space. Patricia's resignation shocked many people. She was a legendary military commander, and many believed she should have taken over the position of supreme military leader. But Patricia did not want that responsibility. She wanted to find peace, or at least some measure of it. She was not sure if peace was possible for her anymore, but she wanted to try. With the money she received from the government and from various public funds that had been established in her honor, Patricia purchased land on the coast of California. She had a simple house built overlooking the Pacific Ocean. From her home, she could see for miles and miles across the water. She could watch the waves come in and go out endlessly, like the rhythm of time itself. She would sit on her porch for hours, just watching the ocean and thinking about nothing in particular. Patricia also established the Kepler Memorial, a monument to all those who had died when the Vorthan forces attacked the colony. The memorial was built in a beautiful park in New York City, and it attracted millions of visitors every year. The names of all 2,300 people who died on Kepler Station were carved into a massive wall of black stone. Patricia had insisted that the names be listed alphabetically, so that no one person seemed more important than anyone else. Among those names were Marcus, age 38, and their 2 children, ages 8 and 6. Patricia would visit the memorial every month and spend time there, reading the names and remembering the faces of those she had lost. Years passed after the fall of the Vorthan Empire. The Vorthan population, which had already been small compared to humanity, continued to decline. The genetic virus that Patricia had authorized the deployment of meant that no new Vorthan children would ever be born. Within 2 generations, the Vorthan Empire would cease to exist entirely. Some people called this justice. Others called it genocide. Patricia did not have the emotional energy to debate which label was correct. She simply knew that the Vorthans would never attack another human colony. They would never kill another human family. Earth itself changed dramatically after the war. The unified military government that had formed during the conflict remained in place. Some people celebrated this unity and believed it would lead to a new era of peace and prosperity for humanity. Others worried that humanity had simply traded one form of threat for another. They feared that the military government that had proved so effective in defeating the Vorthans might become oppressive to its own people. Patricia understood both perspectives. She did not have the energy to participate in these debates either. New generations of humans grew up in a world transformed by the knowledge that alien life existed and that some of it was dangerous. Children learned about the Vorthan War in their schools. They learned about Patricia Hayes and the soldiers who had given their lives in the conflict. Some of these children dreamed of becoming space explorers and military officers. Others dreamed of becoming scientists and diplomats who could find ways to communicate with alien species peacefully. Humanity's future seemed to open up in all directions. Patricia watched the world change from a distance. She occasionally gave interviews to historians and researchers who wanted to understand the war better. She provided her perspective on decisions she had made and explained her reasons for those decisions. But mostly she tried to live a quiet life away from the attention of the public. One night, about 15 years after the end of the Vorthan War, Patricia stood at the Kepler Memorial in the darkness. The names on the black wall seemed to glow slightly in the moonlight. She placed her hand on her family's names and spoke softly to them. She told them that she had kept her promise. She had made sure that what happened to them never happened to anyone else. She told them that she missed them every single day, but that she had learned to live with the loss. She told them that she hoped they would forgive her for all the time she had spent away from them, consumed by duty and revenge. Patricia realized something important as she stood there in the darkness. The revenge that she had pursued so passionately had not brought Marcus and her children back. It had not eased her pain in any meaningful way. What it had done was extend the cycle of violence and loss. Countless Vorthan families had suffered as a result of humanity's counterattack. Countless Vorthan children would never be born because of the genetic virus. The pain that the Vorthans had caused humanity had been answered with even greater pain inflicted on the Vorthans. Patricia understood now that this was the true cost of war. It was not measured just in lives lost or weapons destroyed. It was measured in the lasting damage to the souls of those who fought it. Patricia had survived the Vorthan War, but a part of her had died on Kepler Station with her family. She would carry that loss forever. She would carry the weight of all those deaths forever. This was the price of her victory, and it was a price that she would have to pay for the rest of her life. As Patricia walked away from the memorial that night, she felt the weight of history on her shoulders. She knew that her story would be told for generations to come. Young people would study what she had done and debate whether her actions were right or wrong. Historians would analyze her decisions and question her motives. But Patricia knew that the only thing that truly mattered was that she had acted according to her conscience. She had done what she believed needed to be done, and now she had to live with the consequences. That was all anyone could really do. 20 years had passed since the end of the Vorthan War. Patricia was now in her 60s, and the years of carrying grief and responsibility had left their marks on her face. She spent most of her time in her home by the ocean, living a simple life away from the public eye. She did not give interviews anymore. She did not attend military ceremonies or government functions. She had become a ghost of the legendary commander that the world remembered. Few people saw her anymore, and that was exactly how Patricia wanted it. But the world continued to change in ways that Patricia had not expected. The unified military government that had seemed so strong during the war had begun to show signs of weakness. Some nations wanted to return to their old systems of government. Others wanted to establish new forms of leadership. There were debates about whether the power that the military held should be reduced or expanded. There were conflicts about how humanity should move forward, now that the immediate threat from the Vorthans was gone. Patricia watched these developments from a distance. She did not participate in the political debates, but she read about them in the news. She saw that some people were using her name and her story to support whatever side they were arguing for. Some people said that Patricia's success proved that strong military leadership was necessary. Others said that Patricia had shown the dangers of concentrating too much power in the hands of a few people. Patricia found both arguments equally frustrating and equally valid. One day, a young woman came to Patricia's home. Her name was Dr. Elena Martinez, and she was a historian who had dedicated her career to studying the Vorthan War. Elena had written several books about the conflict, and she had interviewed hundreds of people who had participated in the war. She wanted to interview Patricia as well. At first, Patricia refused. She did not want to talk about the war anymore. She did not want to relive those memories, but Elena was persistent. She explained that she was writing a book that would examine the war from perspectives that had never been told before. She wanted to talk to the people who had made the difficult decisions during the conflict. She wanted to understand not just what happened, but why it happened and what it all meant. Elena also told Patricia that she had interviewed Kesh, the Vorthon commander who had provided the crucial intelligence that helped humans win the war. This news surprised Patricia. She had assumed that Kesh had died years ago. But Elena explained that Kesh had lived a long life after the war, long enough to see the gradual decline of his own people. Kesh had eventually published a book in which he discussed his decision to betray his own species and help the humans. In the book, Kesh talked about Patricia and the role she had played in history. Kesh had written that Patricia was not a villain or a hero, but simply a person who had done what she felt she had to do, even though it meant destroying an entire civilization. Patricia agreed to meet with Elena. They sat in Patricia's house and talked for hours. Patricia told Elena things that she had never told anyone before. She talked about the moment when she learned that her family had died. She described the pain and the rage that had consumed her for years. She explained how she had used that pain as fuel for her mission to defeat the Vorthons. She talked about the moment when she realized that revenge had not brought her any peace or healing. Elena asked Patricia a difficult question. She asked if Patricia believed that destroying the Vorthon Empire was worth the cost. Patricia took a long time to answer this question. She looked out at the ocean for several minutes before she spoke. She said that she did not know how to answer that question. She said that she had saved the human race, but she had also ended an entire civilization. She said that perhaps both things could be true at the same time. Perhaps both things were true at the same time. Elena asked another question. She asked if Patricia had ever thought about what would have happened if she had made different decisions during the war. Patricia said that she thought about this question every day. She wondered if there had been a way to defeat the Vorthons without destroying them completely. She wondered if there had been a way to negotiate peace. She wondered if she had been so focused on revenge that she had missed opportunities for a better solution. But then Patricia explained that these were the questions of someone who had the luxury of time and distance. In the moment, during the chaos of war, there had been no time for such philosophical considerations. She had made the best decisions she could with the information she had at the time. She had acted according to her duty and according to her conscience. Whether those actions were ultimately good or bad, Patricia could not say with certainty. History would be the judge of that. Elena asked if Patricia ever regretted what she had done. Patricia considered this question carefully. She said that she regretted the loss of life, both human and Vorthon. She regretted that her family had been killed on Kepler Station. She regretted that she had been consumed by grief and rage for so many years. But did she regret the decisions she had made during the war? She was not sure. It was complicated. Patricia explained that she had been given a terrible choice. She could have failed to act and allowed the Vorthons to destroy humanity, or she could have acted, and in doing so, she would have to accept the consequences of her actions. She had chosen to act, and now she had to live with what that meant. She did not regret the choice itself, but she deeply understood the cost of that choice. Elena told Patricia that Kesh had said something similar in his book. Kesh had written that both humans and Vorthons had been trapped by the logic of war. Once the violence had started, it seemed impossible to stop it or redirect it toward a more peaceful outcome. Kesh believed that both species had been victims of the conflict, not just the defeated party. Kesh had written that if there was a lesson to be learned from the Vorthon War, it was that violence had a momentum of its own that was almost impossible to control once it began. Patricia said that she agreed with Kesh about this. She had learned this lesson the hard way. She had seen how violence led to more violence and how the desire for revenge led to actions that created new reasons for revenge. She had seen how war could consume entire civilizations and change them in fundamental ways. Elena asked Patricia what she wanted people to remember about her. Patricia thought about this question for a long time. She said that she did not want to be remembered as a hero. She did not want to be remembered as a villain. She wanted to be remembered as a person who had faced an impossible situation and had done what she believed was necessary. She wanted people to remember that war was not a solution to problems, but rather a terrible necessity that should be avoided whenever possible. Patricia also said that she wanted people to remember all of the people who had died in the war, both human and Vorthen. She wanted people to understand that every death mattered. She wanted people to know that the soldiers and civilians who had died in the conflict had been real people with hopes and dreams and families. They had not been just numbers or statistics. They had been individuals whose loss had created ripples of grief that extended far beyond the war itself. After Elena left, Patricia went to the Kepler Memorial again. She stood in front of the wall of names and thought about everything she had discussed with Elena. She thought about Kesh and wondered if he was still alive somewhere, or if he had already passed away. She thought about how strange history was, how it was written by the people who survived and how it was constantly being reinterpreted and re-examined. Patricia realized that she was not the hero or the villain of the Vorthen war story. She was simply a person caught in a moment in history, trying to do what she thought was right. The real story of the war was much bigger and more complex than any single person. It was the story of two civilizations colliding in the darkness of space and of the consequences that followed from that collision. It was a story about loss and pain and the difficult choices that people had to make when facing impossible situations. As Patricia turned away from the memorial, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in decades, she felt something like peace beginning to form in her heart. Not the peace of forgetting or moving on, but the peace of understanding. The peace of knowing that she had done what she could with the knowledge and resources she had possessed. The peace of accepting that some questions did not have clear answers. The peace of knowing that history was still being written, and that future generations would interpret her actions in ways she could not predict or control.